Car crashes have claimed countless lives, but some stand out for their shocking and tragic details. From celebrities to athletes and influencers, these accidents shocked the world and left behind haunting stories. Here's a look at the most disturbing car crash deaths of all time that still spark fascination today. Nick Adenhart's story is one of the most heartbreaking what-could-have-been tales in baseball history, and the tragedy that struck him in April 2009 still lingers in the memory of fans, teammates, and anyone who followed the sport. Just hours before his life was cut short, Adenhart, a 22-year-old pitcher for the Los Angeles Angels, had delivered the kind of performance that suggested his career was about to take off 6 scoreless innings against the Oakland Athletics, a display of poise and talent that made people believe he might become a cornerstone of the Angels' rotation. But in the early hours of April 9, 2009, as he rode through Fullerton, California, in a Mitsubishi Eclipse with 3 friends, his life and the lives of others were stolen in an instant. A Toyota minivan, driven by 22-year-old Andrew Thomas Gallo, blew through a red light at high speed and slammed into their car. The crash killed Adenhart, 20-year-old student and aspiring sports agent Courtney Stewart, and 25-year-old Henry Pearson. The 4th passenger, John Wilhite, miraculously survived despite an injury doctors call internal decapitation, something so severe that most never live to tell the tale. Investigators quickly revealed that Gallo was driving drunk, with a blood alcohol content more than twice the legal limit, and had a prior DUI conviction as well as a suspended license. To make matters worse, he fled the scene on foot, leaving behind the devastation he had caused. The details were shocking, but what stung most for fans was the cruel timing. Adenhart had finally overcome injuries, surgeries, and the grind of minor league baseball to earn his place in the majors, and within hours of proving he belonged, his life was gone. The baseball world responded in grief and disbelief. The Angels postponed their next game, and when they returned to the field, they played with heavy hearts, wearing black patches with Adenhart's number 34. At Angel Stadium, a spontaneous memorial grew as fans left flowers, jerseys, caps, and handwritten notes. Teammates, many choking back tears, spoke of his dedication, his quiet confidence, and how much he loved the game. Off the field, the legal process unfolded. In 2010, Andrew Gallo was convicted of 3 counts of second-degree murder, as well as DUI and hit-and-run charges, and sentenced to 51 years to life in prison, a verdict that brought a sense of justice, but no true comfort to the families who had lost so much. In the years since, Adenhart's memory has been kept alive through scholarships, dedications, and tributes. A Little League field in Maryland where he grew up was renamed in his honor, the Cedar Rapids. Colonels retired his jersey, and the Angels ensured his presence remained in their clubhouse. Survivor John Wilhite's recovery became a story of resilience as he defied grim odds, underwent groundbreaking spinal surgery, and later returned to the Angels' spring training as a symbol of hope in the midst of tragedy. Looking back more than a decade later, Adenhart's story is not just about a promising athlete lost too soon, but also about the senseless devastation that drunk driving can cause. His death serves as a sobering reminder of how fragile life is and how reckless decisions can ripple outward, destroying dreams, families, and futures. And yet, in the way his teammates, community, and even strangers rallied to honor his memory, Adenhart continues to make an impact far beyond the baseball diamond, a legacy not built on stats or victories, but on the inspiration and cautionary lessons his story leaves behind. Jackson Pollock's death in 1956 wasn't just the tragic end of a famous painter. It was the kind of story that feels more like a scene from a cautionary movie than real life. By then, Pollock was already a legend, known as the wild genius of abstract expressionism, splattering paint across canvases in ways that baffled some and mesmerized others. He was at once celebrated and criticized, a man whose talent seemed inseparable from his demons. Alcohol was his constant shadow, and it was not exactly a secret in the art world that his drinking was both fueling and destroying him. On the night of August 11th, 1956, those demons finally caught up. Driving his Oldsmobile convertible on the country roads of East Hampton, New York, Pollock was behind the wheel, drunk and reckless. With him were his mistress Ruth Kligman and her friend Edith Metzger. Less than a mile from his home, he lost control of the car, which skidded off the road, flipped, and slammed into a tree. The crash Pollock instantly and also claimed the life of Edith Metzger, while Ruth Kligman survived with serious injuries. It was a shocking, violent ending for an artist whose life had been one long collision between brilliance and self-destruction. The crash immediately took on a symbolic weight. Pollock had been struggling for years, his creativity had slowed, his drinking had worsened, and his marriage to fellow painter Lee Krasner was strained. He was just 44 years old, still young enough that people expected more great work from him, but also old enough to have left a mark on art history. The manner of his death, reckless, dramatic, tragic, seemed to fit the myth of the tortured artist almost too perfectly. His wife Krasner, who was in Europe at the time, rushed back to New York when she heard the news. While grief-stricken, she took on the role of guardian of his legacy, ensuring that Pollock was remembered not just for the way he died, but for the art he left behind. She organized exhibitions, managed his estate, and effectively shaped how the world would come to view Jackson Pollock. In that sense, his death became the start of his immortality. What could have been just a tragic accident on a summer night instead turned into the cementing of a legend. Pollock the man was gone, but Pollock the icon, the revolutionary who changed modern art, was here to stay. Looking back, it is easy to see his fatal drive as the inevitable last act of someone who lived constantly on the edge. Pollock never did things halfway. His painting style was wild and physical, with him often dripping, flinging, and almost dancing with the canvas as if locked in combat. That same intensity carried over into his personal life, his drinking binges, his outbursts, his insecurities. The car crash was, in a way, an extension of that restless energy he could not control. Yet it would be unfair to reduce him only to that narrative of self-destruction. His art genuinely changed the way people thought about painting. He pushed boundaries, broke rules, and forced the world to see that beauty could come from chaos. The tragedy of his death is that it froze him forever at 44, leaving us to wonder what else he might have created had he lived longer. Had he found a way to escape the grip of alcohol? Had that car stayed on the road? But history rarely gives us what-ifs. Instead, it gives us stories like Jackson Pollock's, messy, dramatic, and unforgettable. His death may have been violent, but his influence remains unshaken, still splattered across the canvas of modern art history. Roland Ratzenberger's story is one of both inspiration and tragedy, the kind that reminds us of the razor-thin line between ambition and danger in Formula One. In the spring of 1994, Ratzenberger was living his lifelong dream, competing at the highest level of motorsport. Born in Austria, he had worked his way up through the ranks, a journeyman racer who was more grit than glamour, finally landing a seat with the small but determined Simtek team. For him, even a modest F1 drive meant he had reached the pinnacle. That weekend at Imola, however, fate would write his name into history under the darkest of circumstances. During qualifying for the San Marino Grand Prix, Ratzenberger's front wing sustained damage on an earlier lap after running wide. Instead of returning to the pits, he pushed on for another flying lap after all. This was only his second race weekend in Formula One, and he was desperate to prove himself. As he hurtled down toward the Villeneuve corner at more than 300 kilometers per hour, the weakened wing gave way completely. In an instant, his Simtek lost downforce and control, sending the car straight on into a concrete wall at terrifying speed. The impact was catastrophic, leaving him with a fatal skull fracture. Rescue crews arrived quickly, but there was nothing that could be done. Roland Ratzenberger was just 33 years old. The shock of Ratzenberger's death rippled through the paddock. It had been 12 years since Formula One had lost a driver during a Grand Prix weekend, and the sport had lulled itself into a fragile sense of safety. Ratzenberger's accident was a brutal reminder that the risks were never truly gone. Yet, in the cruelest twist of fate, his death was almost immediately overshadowed by what happened the very next day, when Ayrton Senna, one of the greatest drivers the sport has ever known, was killed during the race. In the collective memory of fans and the media, Senna's passing became the defining tragedy of Imola '94, often leaving Ratzenberger remembered as the other driver who died that weekend. But for those who knew him, friends, family, fellow racers, Roland's loss was no less profound. He had fought hard to get to Formula One, and his story was one of perseverance, passion, and the determination to chase a dream even when the odds seemed stacked against him. In the aftermath, though, Ratzenberger's death was far from forgotten by the governing body. Along with Senna's, his accident became the catalyst for sweeping changes in safety standards across Formula One. Track layouts were altered to include more runoff areas and fewer concrete walls close to the racing line. Car designs were re-evaluated to better withstand high-speed impacts. The FIA pushed forward with reforms that led to the introduction of the Hans device to prevent fatal head injuries, safer cockpit structures, and stricter crash tests for teams. It is a legacy written in both loss and progress. Drivers today benefit from protections that emerged out of that dark weekend at Imola. Roland Ratzenberger may not be the first name that comes to mind when people recall Formula One's history, but his sacrifice helped shape the safer sport we see today. His story is a poignant reminder that behind every helmet is a human being, carrying dreams, risks, and vulnerabilities, and that even in tragedy, change and awareness can emerge. Ratzenberger's career may have been brief, but his impact on the sport continues to resonate decades later. Steve Prefontaine was not just another talented runner. He was the embodiment of grit, rebellion, and ambition in American athletics during the early 1970s. Born in Coos Bay, Oregon, he grew up in a working-class family and quickly discovered that his legs could carry him further and faster than most. At the University of Oregon, under the guidance of coach Bill Bowerman, Prefontaine transformed into one of the most electrifying distance runners in the world. He wasn't simply winning races, he was attacking them with an intensity that made track and field exciting to watch. He never sat back and waited for the last lap. He charged from the front, forcing others to keep up with his blistering pace. His charisma, rebellious streak, and unapologetic confidence earned him fans far beyond the track, and by the early 70s, he was a household name among sports enthusiasts. Many believed that the 1976 Montreal Olympics would be the stage where he finally claimed a gold medal, cementing his place as one of the greatest runners in history. But fate, cruel and unforgiving, had other plans. On the night of May 29, 1975, after a small gathering following a meet in Eugene, Prefontaine was driving his bright red 1973 MGB convertible through the winding roads of his hometown. He had dropped off his friend and fellow runner Frank Shorter and was making his way back when tragedy struck. Around 12:30 a.m., his car veered left, struck a curb, and slammed into a rock wall. The vehicle flipped onto its side, and Prefontaine was pinned beneath it, unable to escape. By the time paramedics arrived, he had suffocated from the weight of the overturned car. He was only 24 years old. In a single, devastating moment, the world lost a rising star whose career and life had seemed destined for greatness. The aftermath of his death was marked by both shock and mourning. Reports indicated that Prefontaine's blood alcohol content was above the legal limit, sparking debates about the circumstances of the crash. Some witnesses claimed there may have been another vehicle involved, while others insisted it was a tragic accident brought on by late-night driving on a narrow road. Regardless of the details, the fact remained: one of America's most promising athletes had been taken far too soon. His funeral drew thousands of mourners, a testament to the impact he had made in such a short span of time. For the running community, his loss was more than personal. It felt like the air had been taken out of the sport itself. People didn't just admire his talent, they believed in the fire he carried, the belief that running was not just about medals but about courage, spirit, and leaving nothing behind on the track. Today, his legacy lives on in countless ways. The site of his crash in Eugene, now known as Prees Rock, has become a pilgrimage point for runners from around the globe. Visitors leave medals, race bibs, shoes, and handwritten notes, paying tribute to the man who inspired generations to lace up their shoes and chase greatness. His story has been told through documentaries, films like Without Limits and Prefontaine, and books that dive into his complex personality, a man both celebrated for his fearless competitiveness and remembered for the tragic brevity of his life. While he never got the chance to compete in Montreal, Prefontaine's influence helped fuel the American running boom and solidified his reputation as a symbol of determination and defiance. Even in death, his legend continues to run far ahead of the rest. Isadora Duncan wasn't just a dancer, she was a full-on revolution wrapped in silk scarves and dramatic flair. Known as the mother of modern dance, she tossed ballet slippers aside, twirled barefoot, and insisted on flowing tunics that made her look like she had stepped straight out of a Greek temple. But while her artistry was groundbreaking, her death in 1927 remains one of the most bizarre, tragic, and oddly theatrical exits of all time. Imagine this. You've lived a life full of passion, rebellion, and bold statements against convention, only to be taken out by your very own fashion statement. That's exactly what happened to Isadora on the streets of Nice, France. On the evening of September 14th, she hopped into a sleek little convertible sports car, all ready for a glamorous ride. She wore her signature accessory, a long flowing silk scarf. It wasn't just a scarf, it was practically her trademark, the perfect final touch to her free-spirited look. But what no one realized at that moment was that this very scarf was about to become the most infamous accessory in fashion history. As the car sped off, the scarf trailed behind her dramatically, fluttering in the wind like something out of a Hollywood film. But then tragedy struck. The scarf got caught in the open-spoked wheel of the car. In a blink, the elegant silk turned from harmless fabric to lethal weapon, yanking Duncan out of the car and snapping her neck. Death was instantaneous, and just like that, the legendary dancer was gone. The irony of it all was so striking that newspapers worldwide could hardly believe it. Here was Isadora Duncan, the woman who built her whole career around freedom of movement, around breaking out of stiff corsets and rigid traditions, suddenly cut down by the one piece of fabric she refused to live without. It was so shocking and strange that it quickly became legend. Some reports even claimed her last words were, "Je vais à la gloire," in French meaning, "I am going to glory," before the car drove off, which only made the whole thing seem like a twisted bit of fate's dark humor. Others suggested she said, "I am off to love," which fits her romantic spirit but makes the ending no less tragic. Either way, the story spread like wildfire. Imagine being a journalist in 1927 and trying to write that headline with a straight face. Famed dancer killed by scarf in automobile mishap. You'd almost think it was satire if it weren't so heartbreakingly real. Even medical texts later coined terms like Isadora Duncan syndrome or long scarf syndrome to describe strangulation injuries caused by loose clothing getting caught in machinery. Only Isadora could turn a freak accident into an actual chapter in forensic medicine, but as strange as her death was, it somehow matched the spirit of her life. Duncan was never one for quiet exits or ordinary endings. She had lived boldly, scandalized high society with her lovers and her unconventional lifestyle, and had always demanded attention both on and off the stage. Her dances were wild, emotional, full of abandon, her personal life equally so. So in a way, her death was a final act in the same dramatic play she'd been living all along, a scene so unexpected and shocking that it guaranteed she would never be forgotten. Today, people may not know all the details of her performances, but they know the story of the scarf, the car, and the tragic twist of fate. And that's the strange thing about Isadora Duncan. Her death became just as legendary as her art. It's a cautionary tale about fashion and machinery, yes, but it's also a reminder of how life can turn surreal in an instant. The scarf was supposed to be a symbol of her freedom and beauty. Instead, it became the final curtain call. And somehow, you can't help but think that if anyone were destined to leave the world in such an unforgettable, dramatic fashion, it was Isadora Duncan.